and by extension, the people of St. Philip South, who have given me the honor and privilege to be able to present in this honorable chamber. Mr. Speaker, sir, you do know that whilst you may be missing, I am still enjoying the freshest of breeze from the east. And therefore, I can assure you that all is well in the east. I would also like, Mr. Speaker, to congratulate the Joint Select Committee that put together this document. I thought it was a very comprehensive document, and a document that connects with the reality of a 21st century governance requirement. And I opted to say governance requirement rather than system, because I think there's a journey towards reaching a system. Mr. Speaker, if you've been following public discourse in recent times, the one thing that you and all of us in this honorable chamber will identify immediately is the level of apathy and cynicism that permeates this country when people speak to the political class. And Mr. Speaker, I am firmly of the view that whether you support this government or not, whether you are in opposition to the government, the one thing that we have in common, Mr. Speaker, is that we are all in the same boat when it comes to public criticism and public scrutiny. But the public repose their confidence in this administration, and they said, look, the only party that we feel confident enough to run this country is the Barbados Labour Party. And so we're going to give you all 30 seats so that you take full responsibility for making Barbados a better place and to bring about a difference. And Mr. Speaker, I believe this resolution before us is about the first step that we can take in addressing the concerns that the people of Barbados have when they treat to the behavior of the political class and people in government, but particularly governance in this country. Now, I have seen over the years that I've been following parliamentary debates a posture that spoke to people who came to this chamber promising a lot, but have delivered little. And perhaps the last 10 years is the best example I can cite of a time when Barbados heard about promises made, but nothing kept. And the fingering continuously of the previous Barbados Labour Party government, that you will cite issues that you thought no government of this country should engage in. But then you will go ahead and you will bring projects like Cahill, where the very person whose signature is the first on the MOU claim not or remain silent when the issue was brought to Barbadians' attention. And Mr. Speaker, I believe the time has come when all the talking must end, and that we should show that we are serious and that we have taken the people of Barbados seriously. And so therefore, this public finance management bill, to my mind, is about the best example of where we can go to show people that we are serious. Now, we can either do that, or we can continue the same vicious cycle that takes place in this honorable chamber, by continuing the fingering exercise. And if we were to find ourselves guilty of that, Mr. Speaker, sir, then I believe that we can echo the words of the Eagles in their hit tune, Hotel California, where they say you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. Because the reality of it is that if you are going to find yourself part of the same old, then in reality, you're just another Hotel California. And Mr. Speaker, I listen to the public complaints. The Honourable Attorney General was on Brass Tacks on Sunday. And there was a caller that called the program that I will never forget. He said he doesn't trust politicians. He doesn't believe anything that a politician says. He doesn't believe that anything that this government plans will work. He doesn't believe in anything. I wonder if he believed that there were stars and there's a sky. Because inasmuch as he would have looked up, he would have still had doubt. And that would have been created, Mr. Speaker, sir, I believe, because of the performance, particularly in the last 10 years in Barbados. And our responsibility is to respond to the demands of the public in a manner in which we have to now restore that trust and confidence that is required for the populace of Barbados to see us in a different light. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have just gone through the rigors of an estimates planning exercise for my ministry. And in so doing, Mr. Speaker, I have been set with certain targets throughout the coming financial or fiscal year where we have to set markers every quarter to ensure what? To ensure that what we say is what we mean and what we would deliver. To ensure that the money we have asked for to be spent towards our projects will be used for that purpose and not for purposes other than for what they're being voted for. Mr. Speaker, I am at pains to understand what it is when I look at the sugarcane industry, where under the three entities, Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security as a ministry, the BCIC, which is a state-owned enterprise, which we have closed down on December 31st, and the BAMC, Barbados Agriculture and Management Corporation, where in 2017, money was voted for the sugar farmers of Barbados. But that rather than that money be paid as voted to those farmers, some of those funds were diverted to pay for activity that those funds were not voted for. And so you have a situation where one would constantly have to be finding money through the ministry to be able to supplement the deficit that has been created because money that was voted for one purpose has been used to net off against another project. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have more than enough evidence to show that funds that were supposed to be used for the private farmers of Barbados in the sugarcane industry were sent to the BCIC, but $3.6 million of those funds, Mr. Speaker, were used for payments to be made to Inter-Sugar Partnerships Limited. And Mr. Speaker, what that basically means is that a project that came along the way to build out what was supposed to be an Andrews factory project was able to attract funding through the BCIC, whilst the sugar farmers had to await their payments, and that we had to come to government and come to this honourable parliament, this honourable chamber, through a mini budget and a supplementary to pay the private farmers of Barbados. Mr. Speaker, I say that that is not only reckless, it is wrong, and in my view as a person whose training is grounded at the highest level of management, I say to you, it is not prudent behavior. It borders, Mr. Speaker, on a level of corruption that this country must be wary of. And Mr. Speaker, I believe that as we go forward, not only should we now plan through the estimates, but that as we set up our projects for the good of the people of Barbados and to make sure that we behave as responsible people, because we can have the conversation over and over about who's going to get locked up and who's not going to get locked up. But if the system doesn't support you getting there, Mr. Speaker, then you need to make the necessary changes. And I believe that change must start with you. So that change must start with us, the government. And Mr. Speaker, I believe that throughout the next financial year, what we should see is a streamlining of all the projects we are doing, but that the public should be made available to them. Every dime that was spent, how it was spent, who it was paid to, Mr. Speaker, and the reason why it was done. And if we can hold ourselves to that level of accountability, Mr. Speaker, I believe we would have made the first step in convincing the people of this country that we are serious about governance in Barbados, and that for the first time we are serious about managing public finance in a manner that has never been done before. Now, what we have before us is a conversation that will never go away about corruption. So the day you enter public life, the first mark that you will carry against you is the fact that you are prone either to corruption or that in fact you may indeed be. Now, I don't think that this is fair. Mr. Speaker, I am not one who is prepared to spend my entire life in public life trying to fight my opponents on the basis that I must finger them and try to tell the public of Barbados that they are corrupt and no longer worthy, whilst at the same time I continue along the same path. And so, Mr. Speaker, if there are a couple of things that I would want to cite in this document that would help to convince the public that we are serious, I will go to page 19 of the document and I will look at part 2, fiscal responsibility, Mr. Speaker. And fiscal responsibility, for me personally, is something that we have to take ownership of. We have to take ownership of it because we have said to the public, we will be different. And that if you are entrusting us with your money through taxation, then we have a responsibility as a government to comply with certain fiscal principles that will make us stand apart from any other government. And when I cite these principles, Mr. Speaker, I'm reminded of the days when the late Tom Adams was Prime Minister of Barbados. And I recall, even though I was a little boy at the time, he had a debate about integrity in public life. And the thing that he said, the one thing he said that remained with me to this day was, how can anybody oppose integrity legislation? Because at the time there was a hue and cry from the opposition, the same one that destroyed this country over the last 10 years, that there was no need for integrity legislation. Back then, Tom Adams spoke about integrity legislation. But we have gone, Mr. Speaker, to commit ourselves to the management of public finance in Barbados. And we have said one of the principles that we will follow is achieving and maintaining a prudent level of public debt. And we all know, all of us in this chamber know exactly how the last administration treated the public debt. We were rated as one of the third most indebted countries in the world. But Japan had its own way through manufacturing and otherwise, that they could have been able to manage theirs. And Greece, the other one, had the benefit of being a member of the European Union, whilst we stood on a limb that was being sawed off by the very person who held the saw and didn't know how to use it. And Mr. Speaker, if Barbados can today, through its management, prudent management of public debt, can receive or turn us around from downgrade after downgrade to a point now where we receive an improved credit rating or upgrade from our poor junk bond rating through Standard & Poor's, and that we have now also this year received a double improvement in our credit rating, Mr. Speaker. It means that we have already started the journey to what we have committed ourselves to in this document. Mr. Speaker, it says that we should also follow the principle of managing fiscal risks in a prudent manner. And that while we're doing so, Mr. Speaker, our pensioners and people who invested, Mr. Speaker, in debentures and bonds, etc., and that what we have committed the country to in terms of debt would not have occurred. Mr. Speaker, the one thing that stands out with me, and whilst I do not intend to spend the whole evening speaking to this particular resolution, I intend to make it clear that I am fully supportive of the fact that we have reached a point where we have said under public procurement, people within certain age groups must not be left out. Because it is important that if we are going to give Barbadians a fair chance to participate in this country and become part of the ownership structure and share in the economic pie of this country, Mr. Speaker, we must be cognizant of the fact that we have to give the younger people in this country a chance to become owners of the economic structure of Barbados. Mr. Speaker, I am also glad to hear that this government is so responsible that it would commit itself to look at geographic locations so that businesses within certain parts of rural Barbados will not be left to depend on whether or not the population of rural Barbados is capable of supporting them, or even within our city center. Mr. Speaker, at At page 21, the document speaks to reviews, and that it says that we must commit ourselves to mid-year review report and annual reports. Now, I have never heard in this country, Mr. Speaker, where any ministry or any minister, be it finance or otherwise, took responsibility, Mr. Speaker, for delivering to the people of Barbados a performance appraisal, a fiscal performance appraisal of ministries where the public can be kept abreast of what is taking place in the country, and that they can see line by line, item by item, how its government is performing and how their taxpayers' money is being spent. Mr. Speaker, it goes on to speak to a pre-election economic and fiscal update report. Now, had we had that, Mr. Speaker, the many contracts that were issued prior to us coming to government and having to find unprecedented amounts of money being spent, even up to the day before elections be not, Mr. Speaker, that when you consider these things, you must ask yourself, why did it take us so long to get to a situation like this, where we are giving greater accountability to the public for the way the government money is being spent and why people are being taxed? Mr. Speaker, at page 73, ministers having to take responsibility on non-financial performance, Mr. Speaker, and publication of financial statements and annual report of the government. Now, I believe, look, Mr. Speaker, I am the one person who believes that there are so many layers of bureaucracy in the public service. Mr. Speaker, as minister, would you believe that if you speak to certain issues within your ministry with regard to how money is being spent and what budgets are being used for, what projects they're being used for, some may interpret you as being offensive, that this is the responsibility of your permanent secretary. How dare you ask a question and let them do what they have to do, but whenever the Auditor General is finished, the one person that is held up to public scrutiny is always the minister. And Mr. Speaker, I am so glad that we are reaching the point now where a minister can actually make his or herself part of a process where he or she is kept abreast of what is happening, and that reports must be delivered to the public. Mr. Speaker, I know that it's going to take a long time for the public to become convinced that change is upon us. But from what I see before me in this document, Mr. Speaker, as it speaks to how we account to the public for the way we are managing public's finance, Mr. Speaker, I am confident that Barbados is moving in the right direction, and that the government of today is prepared to take bold steps in making sure that we look after the people's affairs and account to them. Mr. Speaker, I canvass in St. Philip South, and during the time of my canvass, I came across what we refer to as returning nationals. And one of the things that they kept asking and drilling me for is freedom of information legislation, wanting to know how they can ever find out in this precious land how the government is spending the taxpayers' money. And Mr. Speaker, if now we can move to a system where online people can go and check and see how government's finances are being managed, Mr. Speaker, and that reports are being issued for the public themselves to have copies of what we have been doing in our various ministries and as a government. I believe one step has been made towards changing the governance structure of Barbados and bringing Barbados to a stage where the process of a 21st century requirement upon all of us who have taken the responsibility to come in this honorable chamber and represent the people of this country can be held to higher office, higher scrutiny, and turned out for the people of Barbados. A very transparent, Mr. Speaker, and above board system that says to the people, this is what we did, here's how the money was spent. Mr. Speaker, I know without a shadow of a doubt that the people of Barbados have high expectations of us. I'm equally mindful, sir, that they have said to us, we're giving you 30 seats because we know that you have demonstrated more than any other that you are the ones who are about to bring about change. And yes, Mr. Speaker, change is upon us this afternoon when we look at this resolution that is before us. And Mr. Speaker, we're not going to be always able to give jobs. We're not going to be always able to repair roads. And with the best intentions in the world, Mr. Speaker, we will always never have all the resources to do all the things that the people want. But what are the things that can bring about the wins? How can we win on the people's behalf? Mr. Speaker, measures like these will give us that first step forward in terms of doing for the people of Barbados what they elected us to do, Mr. Speaker. And I am satisfied, Mr. Speaker, that under the astute, and I would always say tireless because I don't understand where the energy comes from, but it is there, under the astute and tireless leadership of our Honourable Prime Minister, the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, I believe that we have reached this point because she has been tireless in making sure that this administration demonstrates to the people of Barbados that we are ready, promise made, promise kept, promise delivered, Mr. Speaker. And so on the basis of all of what I have said, I believe that the people of St. Philip South and the people of Barbados should indeed start to turn a new leaf in their assessment of the political class, particularly this government, and start to realize that what we say is what we mean and what we intend to deliver. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for St. Michael, West Central.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I rise to support the bill before the Honourable Chamber, and I want to join other members in congratulating the Select Committee, who would have done a substantial amount of work in getting the bill to where it is today. I would also want to congratulate the government for bringing order to public finances through the Public Finance Management Bill. Certainly, financial administration and order is critical in any administration. And if we were to judge from the last episode that we had to encounter not so many months ago, I think all Barbadians and certainly constituents of St. Michael West Central would appreciate the fact that their government has came here today to work diligently on their behalf by introducing a public finance management bill. I believe, Mr. Speaker, it sets out the roles and the functions for those who are responsible for managing the public's affairs within the public sector of Barbados. But it goes further, Mr. Speaker, and it also captures what we refer to as state-owned enterprises and also commercial state-owned enterprises. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, as the chairman of National Insurance, I will have to speak on the commercial state-owned enterprises and the relevance there. But, Mr. Speaker, one thing I believe that we should look at, and it has to do with the designation of accounting officers. Accounting officers, as I understand it, and I stand to be corrected, are commonly referred to as permanent secretaries. But within the bill, I recognize that the Director of Finance would have the right to designate accounting officers. The only caution, Mr. Speaker, that I would like to add, and as I went through the bill, I recognize that there's going to be a significant reliance on financial management. I refer to it commonly as P&L skills, balance sheet knowledge. And another area where I believe we're going to have greater concentration on, and it will have to be on the role of a corporate secretary or company secretary, some people like to refer to it, in the execution of duties as contained within the bill. Because this bill is far-reaching, I hope that not only the constituents of St. Michael West Central will have an opportunity to read it, but other members of society, because it speaks to what should happen, when it should happen, and it also sets out in very clear architecture what is required of public officers and those who are responsible for managing public finances. And that I will give credit where it deserves to go. But the only concern I have is that if you so designate accounting officers and you have persons who perhaps are not trained in financial management, then I think it will be a great opportunity for the government to start a training course or training courses to enable and to assist those persons who will have to deal with a lot of financial detail and a lot of business planning coming out of the proposed bill. The issue, Mr. Speaker, as well, will have to be, and there's a greater concentration of governance, and that we have to congratulate the government and salute them certainly, because like I said, where we've come from and where we're going will demand that we have greater transparency. And this bill not only sets out transparency and accountability, but it also sets up very nicely those who should be held responsible for the liability of government funding. So that's an area I think I presume would be addressed and will be dealt with in sufficient time. Mr. Speaker, the mandate, and if you go back to, for example, in the bill at section 109, and it sets out, for example, the objectives of a commercial state-owned enterprise. What the government, through this bill, is suggesting is that no longer will you be allowed to come with a willy-nilly plan, or you will just get up overnight and decide you're going to spend government's money, but that you will have, as a responsible company or a responsible board of directors of a state-owned enterprise or commercial state-owned enterprise, that you would have to set out a plan. And that plan would have to speak to a number of things. For example, at section 110, it talks about the timing of statement of a corporate intent and annual plan. It goes on to talk about the statement and what is contained in the statement of corporate intent. And I'm not going to rehash those, sir. But what is critical is that it goes on to make some very vital points. For example, in section 112 of the bill, it makes it clear that the board of directors of a commercial state-owned enterprise shall shall cause to be prepared an annual plan containing details for the forthcoming financial year of the expected performance targets and other measures by which performance of the group may be judged in relation to its objectives in the statement of corporate intent, which shall include the performance indicators required by the minister responsible for finance. And Mr. Speaker, that is important, because you've had institutions over the years, for example, the Transport Board, where you government would have had to fund and continue to fund the Transport Board without any significant plan being presented before the country. And time again, when the government would have to come into a parliament and vote for a supplementary, or seek a supplementary in order to fund the resources, you would have criticism from all and sundry. But with such a plan now, Mr. Speaker, it tells the country, and certainly gives the country, and hopefully so, greater clarity in understanding the roadmap and where we want to get to. And I believe that is very noble with respect to the contents of the plan. But what is even more significant, that it goes in and it talks about the explanation of variances in performance in the annual plan. But what is even more exciting, Mr. Speaker, and this is something that happens in the private sector, and the Honourable for St. Peter knows this well, it talks about financial planning, or what we refer to as a financial forecast. And I think if we had done a lot of financial forecasting in the past, I don't think that the country will be where it is today, but that we are not, and we're never responsible and must never be held responsible for the last 10 years. But going forward with the new roadmap, you see the intent of a government that is determined not only to ensure transparency, but also to ensure that it cannot be business as usual when it comes to public funding and public finances. So I really wish to compliment the government again. Certainly, in the same section 112, at section F, 112F, a statement of fiscal risks and the intended management of fiscal risks. Mr. Speaker, that was unheard of prior to the introduction of this bill in this very parliament. In fact, not so long ago, with an entity that I chair, I asked them to create a risk register. Some people looked to me as though I perhaps were speaking another language. But I understood, sir, because if you were exposed, as some of us have been exposed to certain forms of management and corporate governance, it would come to you as no surprise. I believe, sir, that the bill should have gone further and have not only included fiscal risks, but you should have included, perhaps, Mr. Speaker, a risk register, sir, to ensure the complete 360 lock, or ring fencing, as some people would say, in respect of managing risks. They're not only fiscal risks, Mr. Speaker, but there are other risks that could cause harm to government financing. But that perhaps would come at a later date. But I would want to salute the government in that. Mr. Speaker, when you look at section 114, I mean, it is clear that what the Parliament is intending to do is to connect with the population. Because at that section, the House, sorry, with that section, Mr. Speaker, it sets out at 114.1 a statement of corporate intent and annual plan, and it shall be laid in Parliament. And that is necessary, because if you have a plan, there's no greater place that you would wish or ask for accountability than in this honourable place. And by asking for that plan to be laid in conjunction with the annual budget, Mr. Speaker, is a step in the right direction. But it goes beyond that, sir, because at section 114.2, it speaks to the connection with the people and making it clear.
Honourable member, refer to it as clause, please.
Sorry, thank you, sir. Thank you for your guidance. Clause. So clause 2, it says so where the state-owned or commercial-owned enterprises, state enterprises, must publish the statement. And this is a step, Mr. Speaker, in the right direction, because too often I mean, if you follow any of the companies listed on the stock market, you can go there and you can see their prospectus. You can look and you can see, for example, their annual plans. You can see their annual reports. And I believe, sir, that the government is becoming very commercial and necessary so with respect to its reporting. So I salute that, Mr. Speaker. The reporting, there's a requirement Section 116, Clause 116, where the Board of Directors shall cause to be prepared a mid-year report and an annual report. So what we are witnessing here, sir, no longer will you have a situation where you do not know what is happening in state-owned or commercially owned enterprises, where people can do what they like as they like, Mr. Speaker, and then hide behind the non-publication of reports. You have a system through this bill at Clause 116, which makes it very clear and makes it mandatory for those who sit on a board to publish a mid-year report and also annual reports, Mr. Speaker. And as it relates to the annual report, it makes it even clearer when it states that the annual report must be provided no later than 4 months after the end of the financial year to the Director of Finance and Planning. And Mr. Speaker, I hope this holds true, because not so long ago, Mr. Speaker, when we were in opposition as a party and we were all over Barbados asking for explanations, trying to seek out annual reports, you could never get any information. I mean, we obviously have a collection of men and women in this party with very, very good skills, and they were able to get the information and put it to the public in a way that the public will understand and understood certainly what happened during the last administration as we led up to the general election campaign. But no longer should you have a situation where the public's interests must be so hidden that you can have a situation as obtained in the past where annual reports remain outstanding for years, Mr. Speaker. So I really salute the government's decision in this bill to move to mid-year and annual year reporting, but also, Mr. Speaker, to put in markers to make it known you have certain fixed dates or a timetable to follow in respect of reporting. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to detain the House unduly, but the issue as well as it relates to the Auditor General and the submission of audited reports. This is a matter that don't care where you are, even the organization that I chair, you will always have complaints, and we inherited, but we have to fix. But you cannot have a situation where with key institutions, especially those funded by the government, that you can have a situation where audit reports take, for example, years to complete. And that must be a no-no and shall be a no-no. And I really have to commend the government too on this point. Clause 118. And this speaks to the point about not only connecting the population, the parliament, but also connecting the people with state or commercial owned enterprises. At Clause 118, it states here, a commercial state-owned enterprise shall hold a public meeting every 2 years and a report shall be presented at the public meeting of the board, Mr. Speaker. So what it says to all of us who chair boards, including the honourable member for Christchurch South, that you will now find yourself having to present your organization's success and future projections and plans and historical performance to the public. And we've talked about transparency. We've talked about holding people accountable, Mr. Speaker. But this one major clause 118 is a step in the right direction, because it now mandates those who hold office in those state-owned enterprises and commercial enterprises to come to the public every 2 years and report progress. So no longer will you find yourselves in a situation where you can hide the financial performance of any entity. And that's why I made the point that transparency is good, and that those who hold public office must know that what is contained in this bill is almost akin to what is required when you are managing or if you hold office with a public company anywhere across the globe, Mr. Speaker. And the fact that the government has taken the very bold step, the very bold initiative to go this through, we must congratulate and say a job well to the government of Barbados under this Barbados Labour Party. But, Mr. Speaker, I will return to the point that it will require persons to be trained in commercial skills as well, and also finance. Because if you have an accounting officer who may perhaps have an opinion, and that opinion perhaps may be at odds with a minister, for example, if we go back to the section, I believe it was section 19 and 20, and you have a situation where perhaps the accounting officer believes that he or she is right and that the minister is at conflict, obviously there's a resolution where you have to submit information. I would wish if in between there could have been a mechanism to ensure that the matter could be resolved before having to go all the way, because sometimes the execution of public policy is critical. But that is something for another occasion, Mr. Speaker. But the other issue, sir, well, I'm not going to raise that, Mr. Speaker. So I would want to, in closing, compliment the government for bringing this bill before this honourable chamber. Mr. Speaker, is a step in the right direction. It is a couple years overdue, to be honest with you, because if we had this bill before us, a lot of what obtained during the last administration would not have obtained, and if such infractions had occurred, then they would have had the right of recourse to deal with those persons, and there would have been no doubt whatsoever, Mr. Speaker, on the recourse necessary. But I hope, sir, that going forward, the points that I raised, especially in respect of transparency, and that the government will have a wonderful communications program, because this is an excellent piece of, this is a wonderful bill. But I would also encourage the government to start the process of communication. The country and the population will see the benefits of it as you go to public hearings, as you go to presentation of annual reports. But there is a lot of reporting requirements contained in the bill, and I can see those who don't have, for example, entities that don't have a corporate secretary. I can see right away the need for corporate secretaries or general counsels, as they refer to them in some jurisdiction, to help ensure governance is maintained within these institutions. And with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank you.
Member for St. James Central.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to lend my support to this matter which is before the House, and also, Mr. Speaker, to also lend my voice in congratulation of the efforts that have been made by the government, and more particularly, Mr. Speaker, sir, the Joint Select Committee on Public Finance and all of the members of both houses, sir, and to indicate that I am entirely impressed by the amount of work that obviously was put into this matter. Now, much has been said, Mr. Speaker, about the restrictions, if you will, that are now being built into the management process of public finance in Barbados. And I share the sentiments made by members of this place that this is an ideal whose time has been long in coming. In many ways, Mr. Speaker, history is being made in this Parliament tonight because of the fact that for the first time that I can think of, certainly as far back as the memory of man doth run, we have a government that is prepared to come and make a decisive intervention in matters of public finance, which holds itself and binds successor administrations in a way that has never been done before. People in Barbados, and in my view quite rightly so, have lamented the horrific circumstances that passed for governance in Barbados over the course of the decade that ended on the 24th of May, 2018. It has been properly called the lost decade, Mr. Speaker. But the fact of the matter is that, notwithstanding the lamentation and the obvious need for us to continue to do the due diligence that is required, effectively to hold someone or some persons accountable in law for the damage done to Barbados finances and, by extension, Barbadian society, because it is impossible to divorce the financial lawlessness that confronted this country from the social and economic fallout which must be managed today. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, in spite of, or despite the fact that that is also a work in progress, we have, sir, to recognize that the intervention that is being made here tonight sets a framework for the future within which future governments must operate, and it effectively makes it as close to impossible as is possible humanly for there to be a repetition of that type of behavior. And I think that is an important point, Mr. Speaker, sir. I don't want to dwell unduly on it, but I want to say that one of the things that impressed me about this piece of legislation is the fact that we have a Director of Finance, and have had from the beginning of our constitutional arrangements under the Independence Constitution, a Director of Finance and an Auditor General, Mr. Speaker, sir, that were empowered with significant powers, but equally had certain limitations in those things that they could do. And by extension, it meant that, and perhaps I should put it this way, because I don't think the framers of the Independence Constitution ever envisaged the Holocaust of the last administration. I don't think the framers of the Independence Constitution ever envisaged a finance minister similar to that which this country was confronted with up until the last general election. And so therefore, sir, the obvious deficiencies in the checks and balances, you would know well, Mr. Speaker, sir, because you were also trained in law, and you know that inherent in any legal administrative structure must be certain checks and balances.
I remember you said that I was trained
in law.
I still am trained in law.
You are, yeah, well, I can't say you are trained, sir. I have to say you were trained.
No, but as in the past.
You are trained. Yes, no, you are
still
trained.
Current, so I'm still current. Just to mention that I'm still current.
I'm not suggesting anyway that you've lost touch with your training.
And according to my, you all remember for Sir Michael North, I paid my legal fees also.
Well, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I would never have thought that you would have been one who would have trespassed in that regard. Though we do know that there was a gentleman who walked the length and breadth of Barbados telling people to keep calm, though he had not paid any legal fees. But that's another matter for another time in another place. Huh? Any bar fees. But that's another matter for another time in another place. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that there must be built into any legal administrative system an internal system of checks and balances in order to curb the excesses and curb the enthusiasm of mankind to go astray, to do things that they ought not to do. In other words, sir, I think that what this public finance management bill that we're now looking at, that we're now considering, does is to help us go a considerable way down the road of providing checks and balances on what might be seen as the excesses of the executive in future administrations. And it does so, sir, by empowering in a realistic way the Director of Finance, so that the Director of Finance now, sir, has an oversight ability and a reach into the management process in Barbados that he would not have had before. And I welcome that, Mr. Speaker, sir. I say frankly that we have been fortunate in Barbados to have had, and we stand in this place on the shoulders of giants. And we have to acknowledge that we've come a long way because of the integrity and the character of great leaders, irrespective of political complexion, Mr. Speaker, sir. And one of the things that happened up until the last administration was that those leaders, without exception, also held the portfolio of Minister of Finance. So that the management of the country was tied almost like the umbilical cord. The management of the country was linked to the integrity and the character of the great leaders that we had. For better or for worse, that was severed. That process was abandoned and jettisoned in the last administration. Language used by a former great leader himself to the effect that wild boys had taken over, sir, comes to mind. And the grandeur of that which was the Barbados developmental trajectory was destroyed. Mr. Speaker, sir, I believe candidly that this document goes a long way, especially in the powers that it grants in terms of oversight and the power of intervention and accountability to the process administered by the Director of Finance. I think, sir, that takes us a long way in the right direction. But as I said at the very beginning, Mr. Speaker, I don't only want to speak to the restrictions, because obviously that is a necessary part of governance. Obviously we have to rein in, as I said, the tendency or the instinct for excess and to go where you ought not properly to go. But there's a developmental aspect of this that the debate should not miss, in my view, sir. That developmental aspect, Mr. Speaker, sir, takes us to the issues of how we treat in Barbados the persons with disabilities, for example. Now, the proposal in this legislation, and I am convinced, sir, that it will meet with the blessing of this House, and I hope and pray with the blessing of the other place as well, is that contracts of government, by government or with government, which include obviously persons now across Barbados universally, must have a certain percentage must go to persons who are part of the disabled community. They begin with respect to the persons with disabilities, sir, of 1% of those contracts going to persons with disabilities. At first blush, you could say, well, that is a small figure, but you begin the longest walk, sir, by the first step. The philosophical intent must also be looked at within the context of where Barbados is economically today. We are a country that is deep in the throes of financial difficulty. We are struggling to come out of that financial difficulty, but we have to do so in a way that realistically engages all of the resources that we now have at our immediate command, while at the same time carrying along those persons who are less fortunate, who are more vulnerable, who, sir, have been marginalized historically, who, sir, form a critical part of the social infrastructure of Barbados, and up until tonight have never been addressed in this form by this sovereign parliament, which they also have historically been electing from time immemorial. So that, Mr. Speaker, sir, though I would be happy if the percentage was greater, I cannot ignore the fact that for the first time we are coming to say now, not beyond the rhetoric, we transcend rhetorical politics, and we come now to the tangible realities of what Barbados tomorrow must look like. And we say through the Ministry of Finance that 1% of the contracts that government dealing with got to go to persons with disabilities. A fundamental first step in the first 7 months of government, Mr. Speaker, sir. And it gives us enough time to have a window of opportunity that as we go forward in this administration, in this term, and as we see as we inch by inch and foot by foot and yard by yard are able to claw back the lost economic ground, it gives us the opportunity, sir, to give even greater commitments to the disabled community in Barbados. And I am pleased to be associated with the government, sir, that not only campaigned on this issue, but that within 7 months was able to come to the Parliament of Barbados and put it into a legal and regulatory framework. And Mr. Speaker, sir, beyond that, there is an aspect of empowerment that also has to be looked at with respect to as it impacts businesses operated by young persons. This election, sir, or the last election, was characterized by every box in Barbados, every polling district in Barbados, save two, seeing an overwhelming turnout for the Barbados Labour Party government, Mr. Speaker, sir. And I don't hold, I mean, you know, we say save two in St. John, but the truth of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that, again, that in itself was historical, because from as far back as the memory of man doth run, the constituency of St. John did not move in the direction of the Barbados Labour Party. So for there to be such an overwhelming turnout led by young people in St. John, for argument's sake, and across Barbados, because the youth vote in this last election was also historical in nature, it suggests, Mr. Speaker, sir, that there is a demographic out there that recognize the urgency of the hour, recognize the burning need for change, recognize that there needed to be a transformed Barbados, and stood up and said, count us in, we want to play our part. Now, historically as well, Mr. Speaker, sir, we have seen governments come and governments go in the post-independence period, but we have never seen a government come and make a commitment to youth in the way in which this commitment is being made. So that there's not a tinkering with the system, sir. This is not to say that you're going to, and I do not for any moment understate the importance of a youth service, but this is not to say you're creating a youth service. I do not for any moment understate the importance, Mr. Speaker, sir, of a youth parliament, but this is not to say you're creating a youth parliament. This, Mr. Speaker, sir, is to say unequivocally that you are given a platform for young people to be players in the economy of Barbados, and that government is going to take the lead by guaranteeing to the youth of this country 5% of all of its contracts, Mr. Speaker, sir. It is a level of commitment that has transcended any other commitment made by any other government in this place since we were an independent country. And again, It is done within the first 7 months of government, giving us an opportunity to relook this matter as we gain strength economically, return to previous halcyon heights of economic performance, and therefore extend the commitment that we give to the young people in Barbados. But I ain't done yet, sir. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that it fits in neatly with what government has already also said. Because economic management, sir, must be seen as part of a whole. It is not, Mr. Speaker, sir, that you give, you are looking at this in a fractured and segmented manner. So if a government comes into office and says, look, there are a number of young people in Barbados who are keen on doing their own business, who are keen on being able to find an independent footing financially. But what they do not get and what they have never had, and certainly in the last government, Mr. Speaker, sir, what they could not even dream of getting, was an opportunity for someone to trust them sufficiently and to embrace them enough that it gave them a toehold in the Barbados economy, that it gave them an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, sir, to be a part and parcel of the land of their birth in the fundamental economic sense of ownership of a business, of being a stakeholder in a business, Mr. Speaker, sir. Not just to live in the hope that somebody will give you a job, but to live and know what it is to have a business of your own and to employ somebody. That's right. And carry your community along with you. And Mr. Speaker, sir, this government then said, well, we will create the trust loans, and in doing so made history, because nobody else in the Caribbean had no trust loan. No other leader in the Caribbean other than the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mr. Speaker, and Minister of Finance has been prepared to say that I trust the young people in my country enough that I will embrace them and give them this type of financial opportunity. So now that that has happened, we have now come to say not only do you have not only are we giving you the finances to start up your own business, but Mr. Speaker, sir, we go a step further and say that a business operated by you must be entitled at least a part of 5% of government's overall contracts. So you're carrying the youth of the country along with you on the journey of economic transformation and economic empowerment. And I challenge anybody in Barbados, Mr. Speaker, sir, to say that this is not reflective of a breath of fresh air in this country. But I still ain't done, Mr. Speaker, sir. Because in the context of what this bill does, we also have to recognize that we are going another step in the right direction. From time immemorial, governments around the world have engaged in the process of public procurement. You engage as a government in the buying or contracting of goods and services with the people in the jurisdiction that you govern and over whom you administer. That happens all around the world, Mr. Speaker, sir, in all forms and fashions of government. But public procurement in Barbados takes on a slightly different hue in favor of the people of Barbados under this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, sir. We cannot allow it to pass without reflecting upon it. Not because it is a nuance in the system, but because it speaks to the heart of fundamental transformation and delivery of economic opportunity to the average man and woman in the streets of Barbados. Whereof do I speak, sir? I speak specifically to the fact that the bill commits that geographical location becomes a factor in the awarding of contracts of up to $250,000. Now, a contract of up to $250,000, sir, has traditionally been seen as a small business contract. You're saying, sir, that you're going to make sure that small business contracts reflect geographical location. Why is that important? I'll tell you why, Mr. Speaker, sir. Because as an economy contracts, which ours did, what we saw as the Barbados economy contracted was that previous large-sized players were not getting the ordinary or the level of economic activity that they were accustomed to. So a fellow who was not interested in doing anything other than building a hotel or, Mr. Speaker, sir, building a 4 or 5 story building or something like that, he ain't got that kind of work no more. So he decided, well, boy, I got to survive. So I coming down. I coming to fight where the medium-sized men go because the big fellas ain't getting enough of the pie anymore. So he squeezes out somebody and he has more financial might, etc., etc. And those with more financial might, Mr. Speaker, sir, did well under the Democratic Labour Party administration that the people of Barbados got rid of last May. They did well, sir. Too well. I heard someone mention a place called the Grotto. Large players. You know, sir, there's not a small contractor who could say that he used a saw or hammer in there. Not a small contractor. Never before had we seen this phenomenon in Barbados, Mr. Speaker, sir, where you could build accommodation for 100 people, but yet no small man had hit a nail on his head. Not one. So the character of the Barbados economy changed before our very eyes. We saw medium-sized players being forced out of their slot by large men, and then when they were swallowed up and forced out and therefore they shut down, they came down into the smaller slot too. So that the small men, Mr. Speaker, sir, were left to bread for themselves. Which explains why there was such an It is no magic, there's no mystery. There's no mystery attached to this. The reason why all across Barbados people rejected the last government is because all across Barbados the people were rejected by the last government, which allowed economic opportunity for the people as a whole to virtually disappear. And everything was consolidated night after night. I talked about this in the election night after night. The consolidation of wealth. And not just consolidation of wealth on ethno-nationalist lines. So that of a certain hue, you will get through. And as they would say on the street, sir, if you were too black, you stay back. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, how do you intervene? We live in a liberal bourgeois democratic, a petty bourgeois democratic society. That's what we live in. We have to accept it for what it is, Mr. Speaker, sir, a capitalist society. And the language may hurt the conservatives in this place, sir, but I do not apologize for saying that which is true. And Mr. Speaker, sir, the fact of the matter is that the Constitution of Barbados protects the economic rights of all, so that the rain falls on the just and on the unjust. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, how then do you intervene to correct this situation? How do you make sure that big players do not continue to be able to take the work that a small man in the ghetto might otherwise have gotten? How do you ensure that large players who could be elsewhere do not continue to take the opportunities that a small man coming out of Hoyts Village, a small man coming out of Haynesville, a small man coming out from living there in Thorpe's Corner, a small man in Redmond Village or in Fitz Village or in Seaview, St. James, Mr. Speaker, sir, should be able to get? The solution, sir, is for the Parliament of Barbados which was populated by the same small people, and must therefore respect and reflect the challenges of the small people, the Parliament of Barbados must be seen as a tool for the re-empowerment and the opportunity of redevelopment financially of the same small people, sir. So therefore, the magic in this bill is that we now say geographical location for the first time in Barbados becomes a factor in the awarding of contracts of $250,000. Why? Because it gives the same young people, sir, who might be living in Redmond Village, but who have skills, who have a business instinct, who did not grow up wanting to be a thief, who did not grow up wanted to be doing illegal things and running about with a gun, Mr. Speaker, sir. People who have a legitimate belief in themselves that they too can get through in society if society would only allow them to. That those people, sir, be given an opportunity by the government that they elected to be able to say that if there is work in the area or the district where I live, then let me get first choice at that work. Don't bring in somebody who larger than me to compete against me in my district, but he lives 12 miles away and his company 12 miles away. So therefore, how does it translate? It translates, Mr. Speaker, sir, into helping us change the society in which we live and to give people in the society in which we live a stake in their communities. So that when you go into my constituency, Mr. Speaker, sir, as I honestly hope the Minister for Public Transport will do, and not just to fix the roads, he's going to fix the roads, but others will have to fix other things. But you got a pavilion, for argument's sake, sir, that may need work done on it. You have a pavilion that may need work done on it. $100,000 contract. Why should the men that live in the Heights not be fixing the pavilion in the Heights? If they have the skills to fix the pavilion in the Heights, if they have the capacity to put themselves together in a working unit to do the work and discharge the responsibility, Mr. Speaker, sir, why should it be granted to a company that is operating in Bridgetown? Why? If you keep on doing that, sir, you keep on alienating the men from in the Heights. The same principle applies, Mr. Speaker, sir, if you go in the Ivy. I am sure that in the Ivy there is a school.
It's the Mecca of education.
Huh? It is known as the Mecca of education, so it must got schools in there. And Mr. Speaker, sir, if the schools, and I do not believe that in the Ivy there is a large preponderance of private schools. I believe the schools are run by the government.
Community college.
Huh? So, Mr. Speaker, sir, if community college needs to be repaired, and it got a contract at community college for $200,000 in work, you won't tell me, Mr. Speaker, sir, that there's something wrong with going to get the people from in the Ivy? Or if you need a contract for $250,000 to do some work, what is no Ross University, that is something wrong with going to get the people from the community, from a Titchborn, Mr. Speaker, sir, to go and be able to discharge the responsibility. Or if there's something wrong in Welch's school, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the fellows from Redmond Village cannot go and discharge the responsibility of fixing it if it falls within a certain financial framework. What we are talking about, Mr. Speaker, sir, is giving people an opportunity to do work in the community that they come from, to have a stake in the district that they come from, to feel a sense of pride in the area that you live in, Mr. Speaker, sir. And therefore, gone forever must be the days like what happened in the grotto, where the member for St. Michael South would tell you, built by a stranger, employing nobody from the district, and left empty for months thereafter, while people from in the district could not get shelter. Government can't work that way. Government should never work that way, Mr. Speaker, sir. And this piece of legislation is not just a tool of restricting future administrations, this one and others to come, because as I said, we now have passed a piece of legislation that holds us accountable for a certain standard. We have held ourselves accountable. And I don't want anyone in here to be bamboozled by the leader of the opposition, you know, by getting around to him. Because the leader of the opposition would have it go there. That this government, sir, ought not to be lauded about the fact that we have held our own feet to the fire. Now, IMF ain't holding nobody's feet into the fire in this administration, Mr. Speaker, sir. We have said we give the country a level of accountability and a commitment. We will no longer have governance the way in which it was done between 2008 and 2018. And having said so, Mr. Speaker, sir, we then held our feet to the fire. Within the
Your Honourable has 2 more minutes.
Only 2 minutes, sir?
Only 2 minutes.
I had told the Attorney General that I was going to speak for 5 minutes, sir, and I ended up speaking a little longer. So,
over 30 minutes
the
already.
truth is, as I started to speak, I thought, Mr. Speaker, sir, as I started to speak, I thought, Mr. Speaker, sir, this was an opportunity as well to reflect on some of the achievements that this administration has been making. Because the word must go out there, sir, that there are tangible differences in the approach between this administration, and the past one. I hear all sorts of people coming out with the word work. Oh, I'd be interested in running for politics for the last, what was the last political party in government? I don't even call them that anymore. You know, Mr. Speaker, sir, I truly believe that before you come and declare that you got an interest in going into public life with those people, with that crowd, you should state what your position is on the scandalous behavior of the crowd that you're coming to associate a name with. I believe it should start there. Don't just hold your hand and say, me too, me too, me too, because you got some friends that get licking, rape the state, sodomize the state, I never even heard the word Vaseline. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that approach is not acceptable.
Honourable, be careful with the wording and the language that you are using in this hallowed chamber.
For the sanctity of
Honourable member, just be wary. Just be wary that you are speaking
yes, sir.
to the Barbadian population, and that there is a spirit of civility and decorum that must always emanate from this hallowed chambers, and I will not tolerate anything other than that while I sit in this chair.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I without being invited to, sir, I ask that it be struck from the record. And I will conclude, Mr. Speaker, sir, by simply saying that I think that this. Well, we don't behave. I think, sir, that this creates an opportunity for us to reflect on the empowering nature and the developmental nature of this piece of legislation, above and beyond the very obvious steps that this legislation will bring towards curbing the worst instincts of human nature. But above and beyond that, because all of us are not bad people, above and beyond that, Mr. Speaker, sir, this creates an opportunity for the disabled community. It creates an opportunity for the empowerment of people on the basis of their geographical location. It creates an opportunity, sir, for businesses to be operated by young people in a way in which this sovereign parliament never spoke to those sectors before. And I am proud, Mr. Speaker, sir, proud, I say to you, to be associated with the government which has been able to do that in such a short time. I'm obliged.
Honourable member for St. James South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to give my fullest support to the report of the Joint Select Committee on the Public Finance Management Bill 2018. This represents for the good people of St. James South a breath of fresh air, a sigh of relief. My ears have been filled constantly as I knock on doors and talk with people. Their disgust, their concern about the level of corruption that has impoverished them and impoverished their nation and endangered the future of their children. They also ring in my ears, Mr. Speaker, that such persons must be brought to justice, that is what they are looking for. They also want to know that the government that they've reposed their confidence in will put in place those tools, will put in place that legislation, those initiatives that will help protect this nation from the level of ravaging that went on under the last administration. And this forms part of what a new Barbados Labour Party administration has put into place in less than 10 months to seek to protect the people of Barbados, protect their resources, and protect their future. There are a number of clauses that have been included in this Public Finance Administration Bill that will gladden the hearts and relieve the minds of all right-thinking people. And of great importance to all of us is the fact that this particular bill will require enterprises and entities within government and under government's control to report and update on their performance, to submit first of all the plans that they are going to bring in any given year, to give an account for those plans, to ensure that they're executing what they said they would execute, as well as they must deliver to the citizens the roads, the repairs, the transport, the health, the environmental services, the agricultural services. All these things must be delivered because good execution of the projects must occur. And therefore, those requirements make a tremendous difference because, Mr. Speaker, it means that good governance now must take place in Barbados. It has implications for who you hire to put on a board, who you hire to work in a government agency, because a government now must make sure they bring forth the best talent of Barbados to sit in those places, to give life to the plans and to execute the plans so that the results that are to be delivered to enable Barbadians to live good lives can occur. And therefore, this is important to Barbadians. Another set of clauses that have been included, Mr. Speaker, that would be of great importance and certainly for me is clause number 64, 59 and 64, where the government can no longer be printing money in order to lick out the money and impoverish the economy of Barbados. They also cannot impose a liability on government unless it has the prior approval of Parliament. And my colleagues have already shared some of the instances of where we were committed to large sums of money without the prior approval of this chamber. And now this government finds itself with limited fiscal space because we've been committed to so many projects, and those that they have had to stop, we still have financial liability because we were not able to fulfill the agreement or the contract that was entered into on our behalf but without our permission. So therefore, those two sets of clauses will stop the reckless management of our economy and give us a measure of protection. The other clause that is of importance too, Mr. Speaker, is the issue of the powers to summon, to punish those who refuse to appear, people who refuse to provide information, who mislead or destroy. Any form of not wanting to come and give an account, there are powers there now to find those persons. My favorite, however, Mr. Speaker, is the circular firing squad that you find between clauses 10 and 20. For here, you have a list of the responsibilities of all the persons involved in the chain of command in relation to the management of the resources of Barbadians. The responsibilities of the Minister of Finance, the responsibility of the minister over the particular ministry, the responsibility of the Director of Finance, the responsibility of the Accountant General, the Auditor General, the Permanent Secretary, the CEO if it is a government enterprise, the Controller General, the Public Officer. Each one of them have responsibility to so manage the affairs under their concern that it meets the requirements as laid out in this bill. And they also equally have the responsibility that anytime something goes amiss, they have a responsibility to put it in writing, to say, I do not agree with this, or to draw to someone's attention that something is going wrong. What that means is that you cannot have endemic corruption going through the government system year upon year upon year upon year, because everybody in that ring now is going to be held liable and could find criminal proceedings being brought against them or fines being brought against them. And therefore, it will cause each of them to have to take responsibility not only for their own actions, but where they know of other actions that are violating this particular bill, they have a responsibility to speak up, Mr. Speaker. They can't say, the devil made me do it. And therefore, this piece of legislation is one that gives the Barbadians a comfort as they take the time to read it, as they understand the roles that have to be played, the powers that have been given. It will give comfort to them that at last some level of protection is coming that will prevent a situation from emerging ever again in this country in which their lives could be ravaged and being pushed into poverty because of poor management and corruption. And I say this because the Democratic Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, I have listened to things that their members are saying. I've listened to their new leaders speak about where they are at and what it is they want to do. And I've listened to the public relations strategy that they've been seeking to put in place. They are now speaking to their supporters and to the rest of Barbadians to say to them, look, I know you are vexed with us, but you went too far. You have no opposition. You must rebalance this. That you need an opposition to make sure that there is a check on government. Well, Mr. Speaker, we were in opposition. We were a strong opposition. We were a vocal opposition. We were powerless to stop what occurred in this country, despite the fact that we were vigilant. What was needed, Mr. Speaker, was sweeping legislation of this nature to give real protection to the people and the resources of Barbados, and Barbadians can rely on it. Now, why is this so important? You see, this is more than just the protection of the public purse. This will actually strengthen our economy, because now our monies must be spent in a particular way. Plans must be executed and deliver the results, and these results will redound to a better life for people. So it strengthens the economy, it forces good government practices, But it does two other things. It actually helps us in our international engagement. Now, Mr. Speaker, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, we have to engage a lot of international agencies. And one of the trends that is coming out in your engagement with them is that a lot of them now are asking or seeking that they see some form of legislation that shows that we take corruption seriously and that transparency is a part of how we do business. Otherwise, they do not wish to be giving their resources to places where they cannot guarantee they will deliver what the monies were given for.
Very good point.
And if Barbados is going to get out of the difficult economic situation we are in, this forms part of our arsenal to help us build the international image that says Barbados is an entity with which you can do business. Barbados is an entity with which a reputable organization can have engagement with. And this will provide for us the opportunity that we need to be able to gain the resources that will help us to help Barbadians. But it is not only that. The image of the country is not only improved, but regular investors want to be able to engage our space, to bring investment monies, to generate jobs, to generate foreign exchange, but they want to do it with a credible and reputable country. The stories that we have been hearing in the ministry since we've come in, so many potential investors who were seeking to engage the former administration stepped back from doing business with Barbados, and they listed as the #1 problem the level of corruption. So many times I was so embarrassed. But they said they feel that they can engage this particular administration. And I will tell you this, Mr. Speaker. I did some research. And I found that one of the reasons why so many investors stepped back wasn't only because many of them like to act with integrity, but they are expected to act with integrity because of a little something called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. That this particular act is in United States, Canada has, Britain has, and other countries have. And it is very plain and very straightforward. What it does, it criminalizes and fines companies and individuals who engage in the bribery of foreign officials, political parties, and governments to secure or maintain contracts. And you are not allowed to say that it is common practice in that particular country for you to bribe an official for you to get off. You're not allowed. You also cannot plead ignorance. You are supposed to know what your officials are doing. You are supposed to know what your agents are doing. You're supposed to know what your intermediaries are doing on your behalf, because you will be found liable. And the legislation goes on to say that if you have been engaged in corrupt practices and you have been bribing officials and you use the email system, the internet system, the banking system, the telephone, send an email in furtherance of these acts, you are liable under this legislation. And what it said is that since 2011, the United States has stepped up its use of this particular act. That they actually send FBI agents to various countries to investigate those countries in search of those of their citizens or their enterprises which may have engaged in corrupt practices in these countries. That they are serious about this because they say it distorts trade and it compromises the international economic system. So apparently, their track record is so good that at the moment they have between 40 to 50 cases pending, and in Barbados we know of one of them. And they say the government does not lose these cases because they intend to stamp it out because it corrupts the international economic system. So when Barbados takes the time to protect its citizens with this bill, to protect our resources, to hold to account those who engage in practices which corrupt our public finance administration system, it is in good company. It is growing up. It is taking responsibility when it holds accountable those who have responsibility for the public purse. And sir, one of my colleagues shared earlier that yes, there may be some provisions that are onerous. The constant reporting, the constant checking, being vigilant. But any Barbadian who has lived through what has gone on in this country in the last 10 years will consider that a small price to pay to safeguard our future and to safeguard our children. And this particular act, to me, forms part of a wider initiative. I remember our Prime Minister shared with us in Cabinet what her priorities are for Barbados in 2019. And when I listened, Mr. Speaker, one was the importance of this particular act. She spoke to the Attorney General and said, we need to see the judicial system cleaned up. We need to get that backlog of cases moved. You need extra judges and magistrates. Let's see what we can do to make that happen. She said to the Minister of Environment, Barbados is not clean. The physical environment is unhealthy. It is posing a threat to health. It is posing discomfort to citizens. I want to see the entire nation clean. She said to the Minister of Home Affairs, this recent spate of violence, killings, is unacceptable, and she does not intend to govern over such a state of disarray. This must be brought under control. And so immediately, a number of subcommittees are set up. Initiatives are being looked at to see what we can do to begin to take control over what is happening in crime. We had economic measures to be able to stabilize the country, the mission-critical issues, and now we're undergoing the transformation. And when I listened to her share what the priorities are, I said to myself that the year 2019 is the Barbados National Cleanup Campaign year, where we're going to be cleaning the environment, the economy, the society, the politics, the judiciary. Mr. Speaker, transformation of Barbados has to start with that national cleanup. And I am proud to be a part of the team. I I'm very pleased with the work that the team has been doing and the leadership we've had, because this national cleanup campaign of 2019 is propitious simply because it comes ahead of the gathering in 2020. We must not invite people back here to a place that does not work and is not clean. And therefore I want to commend the Prime Minister, I want to commend my colleagues, I want to commend the Attorney General for this report, and I say press on, do not weary in well-doing. We will deliver Barbados and make it ready to shine. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Thank you.
Honourable Sir Michael East.
Thank you.
The long and short of it.
Mr. Speaker, that's the irony of it. I prefer to put it within the context of the African traditions that you always seek permission from the elders. In those circumstances, the answer is no. I will speak for it. Sir, I get a little disturbed, especially when members of Parliament do not give credit to their own intellect or to their own commitment in bringing about transformation in this country. I listened attentively, and I heard people giving voice and credit to the template of a private sector as being responsible for the guidelines that put us where we are, because the suggestion that the private sector is free of corruption. I heard others say that this is probably an MF program, and these sad moments occur from time to time where people like us can even say that we have the creativity, the commitment, the compassion, and the vision to understand that there's a need for changes, fundamental changes, at this historic juncture in the history of Barbados. Now this, for me, this model is a people's model. This is like singing praise to Lord Morn, or singing praise to the members of the Dean Commission, or singing praise to many other commissions which you have had, without understanding that these people went into a model of social investigation. And it was the views of the people that these formations, these members, these collective bodies listen to the views of the people. The people who are experiencing the hurt, the people who are experiencing social deprivation, the people who are experiencing powerlessness and oppression. These are the people who echoed their feelings all across Barbados about this sad state of being of this society prior to May the 24th, 2018. The same thing occurred throughout the 20th century, in the first half and in the second half. And because some people wrote down what people said, even the historians interpret it as giving credit back to the master from the imperialist sovereignties for putting these recommendations in place for social, political, and economic change. Long before even a general election was called, across this country, people were expressing their feelings about corruption. Long before the FBI or any agency in the United States of America, or anywhere identify that there is something in the environment as a reflection of debauchery long before that occurred? These people of Barbados, the poor people, were expressing their views. What occurred on the 24th is a mirror, because that's the mechanism that they have. In other countries, that would not be the mechanism that would be used. It is just that there was a void in the society that had no militant leadership to turn this society over like it was turned over in the 1930s. But the people are angry. How do you explain all the scientists' views, the labor views, all kinds of theorists' views that St. John was a safe seat, that the government then was concentrating on a number of constituencies across Barbados, and they were sure that, including myself, sir, that we will never be seen in here again. I am here 4 times. Go and look at the brass, but look at the brass on the outside. I see Prescott name inscribed in the brass 4 times. 4 times. And if you go up to the Senate, you will see 1. 5 times. On my way to 25 years of serving in this chamber. You know, this is a boy out of obscurity. No outstanding academic, no professional, no big businessman, never worked for any conglomerate anywhere, but understand all the dynamics of human survival. And I want to give credit. Charged before the court. Charged before the court. As a consequence of these same evil, of these, Madam Prime Minister, rest assured we will never forget. When I look to the left and I look to the right, the Honourable Prime Minister was there at my side, ably representing me against one of the prosecuting sergeants was arguing that when the different section, and I also, and Mr. Speaker was also there. I had 2 of the best attorneys in the region. I felt safe and sound. But you know, I have to give credit to the Prime Minister, because I said that I was not coming in the court, and if they want me in the court, they will have to lift me in the court. Because they never even sent me a summons. But I went there to be the shoulder of a friend. I was in the yard standing up. I heard my name echoing in Corey Street. That morning, I did not even have breakfast. You know, sir, these are, sometimes these things turn out to be light moments. And that is a narrative and a reality that I will never forget. And it says something about the reason why the people had to jettison such a regime in this country. I want us to understand and take this thing serious. No, IMF, I'm not saying that IMF might not got a moral footing. I am not going to say that the only people that hold a moral footing in relation to these concerns are the members of this parliament. I am not going to say that the IMF might not suggest anything in this document, but I do not know. But I believe that apart from checks and balances in a system, There is a higher order in the universe that tells us what is right and what is wrong. There is a high principle of morality that must guide anybody who comes to this chamber as a representative of the people, and more so as a representative of the most vulnerable people. People that know that something is wrong, but they have no power. If they could lock up all the members that were in here, that were defeated in the last general election, we would not be talking about a defeat. We would be asking questions, are they still incarcerated? That would be the question sometimes. Hoping that no appeal would be granted. The laws should be as stiff as that. And I don't think that we should be waiting until we get to a judge in the judiciary. You know, there are states who would not waste time. We got many cases before the court that cries out for justice. We know that they are criminals. We see monuments and towers in Holders Hill. We see them on the coast area in St. James, in St. Philip, in Bay Street. I know and you know. But the major challenge that we have had is because we had no legal instrument that we felt confident enough that we can use it and bring back a verdict of guilty for all these people these perpetrators of the criminal activities. Naked as that, it is no polished language. This is no polished, this is the truth that we are experiencing these things in Barbados. And I want to thank the opposition. I want to thank, I think there are 11 persons who have been involved with this committee, this Joint Select Committee, for the effort that they have made, less than a year, move swiftly to arrive at this point. It is not a consummate document, but it starts a process. And as we debate this and share ideas with each other and make assessment of the views expressed by each other, at a later date we can come back and tighten up this document to make sure we stop all forms of escapism, all forms of dodging the law, especially when men involved in state felonies of the kind that we witnessed over the last few years. So give some credit to the people of Barbados and try to interpret the elections not in terms of numbers, but as a qualitative value to the judgment of the Barbadian public that says something that people who are at this level ought to be able to make an assessment to deal with these issues. I've sat in these chambers and people overtly expose themselves, telling lies, and come back to these chambers and apologize. I've been in these chambers and I've heard men saying that they saw me places that I never went in my entire life, saying that I shake down Caucasians for the money. And the man that was speaking was one of the biggest criminals in the universe. Was one of the biggest criminals in the universe, and time will tell. He might escape this sovereignty successfully, but he might not escape the other. And this is not the first time that things like this occurred, because it seemed to be a common practice in his life. We heard stories, and my friend on my right scratched the surface. We heard stories about the inflation of the value of government housing estate, the buildings. Way beyond the imagination. Any layman that don't know anything about, what do you call it? Quantitative surveying. To be able to measure at what point the construction should take X amount of dollars, can just make a general assessment and know that a building that starts at about $16 million, there's no way that as a consequence of the cost of material overnight, the building can escalate up to $28 million. You know that's corruption. You know it's corruption. But if you do that, you know, it tells us something. That man must pay in one way or the other. The law might not be able to box that kind of behavior in the way that it would like. And even as we do this, there are some masterminds that regards to how we do this. The criminals are so scientific, they are so innovative, that they will still find a loophole to get out. In a housing district, after doing all of that, they had people who went on the platforms and spoke on the behalf of these same political institutions, namely the last government. Those people begged for support, could not get a unit in their own constituency. A government that preached with some of the most melodious songs about how they must cater to the people within, and that's them hoping that my government do not talk about community-oriented programs and sound like poets, but don't mean anything. You can't tell poor people that this community is densely populated, and I am going to alleviate the challenges that you face in your homes. And then when the houses are finished, you tell them you are not qualified to live in these houses. You either work for too much, or you work for too little, or we ain't even renting the house to nobody that got 60 or 70 children, because they get nasty up or mash up the government housing estate. So the people that live in the estate, like the Grotto, like the estate in the Valerie, go out there now. Ask them, how many of you ever get a unit from the last government? A lady called me from Villa Road and told me the role that she played. She was living in a broken down house with a compressed mud floor and an outdoor toilet. She could not get any help from the last Prime Minister or St. Michael South Central. Then not this representative, or this is a different human species. Not that type. He had no heart. I went over there, I had to take things for that woman in order for her to survive. I talk about corruption, I talk also morality. Talking about checks and balances, that is noble, because lots of people here like to accountability and transparency and accountability of human beings. You got to learn to treat human beings with respect, especially poor people. No government worth its salt, and if this government behave in the same way, the public should reject all and make more history again. It should never happen. It is a lesson that we witness and experience on the 24th of May, that you have to treat people well. And that when you come in here, economists, political scientists, sociologists, lay people, at at the center of the Barbados Labour Party's program must be people. People development. There's a book by the Labour man called Chomsky. Chomsky is very clear. We don't deal with profit over people. People believe that development, and that is why some people in here was talking all the things that they were talking this morning. No adjective is worthy of describing it. Trust me, it would not be suitable for in here. But when people can ignore the value of self, I always seem to believe that people that don't look like them is responsible for all forms of development and goodness in mankind. And the history of these people shout loud to the world at large that this is a lie. People that greedy, people that their major objective is maximum profit by all means necessary. The front page of the newspaper shows you sometimes things that people do in order to achieve. You want to hear stories by this traditional business type? Some people come and tell you, I had 6 cows. My father has 6 cows and a box cart and 2 sheep, and he sells them every weekend. And then the next set come out, he had 14 pigs and so. And we accumulate all of this wealth across Barbados. So you got Draxall, you got this place, you got the next place. So you sell sheep, and you sell cows, and you sell chickens, and they got members in here that the family have more chickens and cows than them, and they ain't got no wealth. They ain't got no wealth. You know very well that there is a special means. A special means that these people use in order to achieve. There cannot be a model for the state. The state constitutes members who represent the people. And the greatest source of human development is people. Not land or capital, people. Workers. Labor. I believe that's what the Minister of Labour was saying this morning, to respect labor in the circumstances. This government must be guided not by only checks and balances. It is a fundamental, it is important, but not only checks and balances, you must have a human conscience. We can't go wrong. If we had to make a difference, one of the reasons why the last government get put out of office is because of inhumane, arrogant, men that come in here in rags. And men that came back, and I witnessed them here changing 2 suits a day. Going lunch and came back in a different suit. I see men come in here in Suzuki's, and then the next thing you know, you see them blue and heavy blue Mercedes men parked in the yard with nickel all over it. You think people don't understand we're flaunting wealth and making mockery of them? I told you already, but I see 2 men driving here, scratch off tires and burn rubber at the gate. Little children who had no toys, excited at the age 57 and 67 years old, excited. Driving a BMW and a Mercedes Benz. I see all these things. It is this document that will help us to close those loopholes. You will never be able to do it in one single document. But by being straightforward, purge yourself of all the formalities and speak the truth about these people. It is what we see and what we experienced in the last few years that drove us to be able to produce this. If people talk for 2 more days, the size will be about 3 times the size. That's the nature of what is happening. And sir, the effort of trying to address these things and these social imbalances led us to important public officers. You know what? You hold all these committees of parliament, and then they would send down an attorney general, and an attorney general would believe that he knows the law when he knows not, and he will come down to one of these committees and try to tell people this do not falls with this is ultra virus and all kind of things. You hear all this thing down there, a lot of funny poetry that people never quite understand. Meaningless poetry again. And then you end up with 3-3 down there, and you got a speaker, not you, sir, not like you, sir, unlike you, sitting in a chair with not so wholesome a character. And I have to say, Your Honor, Mr. Chairman, Honor, this is not fair. That is not fair. An effort to address that end up futile because the attorney, the person who was responsible for legal matters in this chamber came down to the committee, filibuster, waste a lot of time. The matter came back, supposed to come back to the House Assembly, and never came back up. We were powerless. That died. We had other people that we summoned before a Public Accounts Committee. You had no muscle. You could not get them here. If you're going to produce a document like this, we know that is a concern that has to be addressed. That's no IMF matter. That is what we experienced and what we saw. This is more homegrown than other things. This is homegrown. The only thing that I'm sorry about is that we don't have a subcommittee in here with the powers to put somebody in jail while they're wasting the criminal court time, the Supreme Court time. We should be able to bring them here. We got all the evidence. And as long as we do things in a fair and just way, 5 years, 10, life. Mr. Speaker, I believe that you would enjoy that. I will be here to support you. Hopefully, give me the job as a prosecutor from the chambers. No. Lots of people don't like to hear these things, although they know it is true. And some people believe that when you talk these things, you are not democratic. I am very much democratic. I am a democratic socialist, and I don't apologize for that. And any time that I feel I'm slipping away from that, it is my time. It is my time. But I know how hard it is for sovereign states to keep on that trajectory. It is hard. I understand what happens at the international and the regional level. The forces of neoliberalism doing everything to erode the powers of the state. And we will see it over and over again. There are other persons that I don't know what they believe in. I can't tell what they believe in. These are people that are ignorant of their own beliefs. I remember they had a previous leader here said when he was in his 20s, late 20s, said he is too young to have a philosophy. What if I don't have a body of ideas or values that will help him to shape his destiny? But he didn't have that. He had $3 million. But on the outside, as an external evaluator, I was able to look and see what he was interested in. He didn't know. But then we hear about $3.3 million leaving Clico and going up to David Thompson's law firm in Bay Street. And he didn't know what his philosophy was, but he knew he was stealing. He We was hearing about a place in Bar, and it was Bar for Martins Bay, in Martins Bay. We were hearing that. Then we were hearing about new firms being formed, new legal entities. It is not me. It is the company, not me. We were hearing about that, and you were hearing about prominent individuals joining and creating a kind of, what do you call that, acronym? Some kind of strange name, exotic indeed, mafia, close to mafia, right? People forming companies, getting involved, mafia, involved in all types of activities. You don't know where this program came from? There's nothing about that. That is a mirror of the IMF policy. That is about people in Barbados involved in all types of criminal activities at the highest level. These are people that had no moral principles to guide them.
I remember has 2 more minutes.
We are on our way where we give power to the Auditor General. We are on our way where we give power to the Director of Finance. Before these men can exercise power so far and no further. Or not, we would have, all right now, the show would have been over. The Barbadian public would not be crying out for action. We want to give them action. I want to give them action. Because my people spend a lot of time in jail in my community for small things that don't even deserve community service. A CRD would do sometimes. And so they have to get large sums of money to pay the attorneys. Just for the attorney to say, this man has a spouse and 6 children. His girlfriend is disabled. She cannot work. The welfare department would not provide a cent or any form of assistance in kind. And therefore the man stole a tin of corned beef from Massey. And you want to go and ask a magistrate for a break? Use your intellect and your time to go and ask a magistrate for a break, and probably at the end of the day, the magistrate time might take 21 days. And then he has a record in life as the biggest criminal in the world. He can't go to the States, he can't get a job, he can't cut fencing, he can't cut bush, nothing, because he went to jail for 21 days. Nothing like that. And you, the people who making the laws, can wear all the state money, moving from rag to riches, who come in as billionaires, going as billionaires in the system. And they got money in the States, they got money all up in Dubai, they got money all about, including on the bed, put in the safes and everything. All of that is happening and we cannot do anything about it. Sir, I am not going to abuse your generosity. I, sir, want to thank you. There's one or two other things I would like to say, but you have been extremely kind to me. But this report and the opportunity for us to evaluate and monitor every 6 months or so. People bring reports to this parliament. The model of the parliament has been expanded. It's a society now that we got intelligent people in almost every household. And we have officers, public officers, that they are public officers. And I know you talk about the private sector, but the same way you can ask people in the private sector questions, we can ask the public officers questions. We can ask the ministers questions. We can make suggestions to the ministers, but we can also look in the reports to see if they're meeting the expectations. You have a project. The project is to be at a specific stage at a specific time. We want to know if you're there. We want to know if you spend the money that is proportionate to where the project is. We need to know early half year down the line. We need to know if you got a balance and then we need to be able to examine the details of the accounts so we will know if there is some steal in there. You know, the unfortunate thing is,
I remember, can you wind up? You know how it is with you and landing. You know how it is with you and landing this helicopter, please.
So we're just making sure that we establish, and hopefully in the disjointed way in which I put things, I hope that we can put a number of principles and tenets that this government will be guided by that go even beyond the credible checks and balances that we have put in place as a result of producing such a document. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir. I would not have known how to allow this debate to be completed without participating in it. And in spite of the lateness of the hour, and in spite of being in the middle of conducting estimates for the next financial year, in fact, we are still in another place in this building about to start the Queen Elizabeth Hospital estimates. I felt that it was important for me to come and speak because this is one of the most important pieces of legislation that will be passed in a post-independence Barbados in order to be able to significantly increase the level of accountability of a government to the governed. And, sir, it is consistent with the approach that our government has taken towards the message that we went to the people of Barbados on. And I say we, because I believe that all 30 of us in here went on that message. And we all went confident in the knowledge that Barbados could no longer be governed by people who did not feel that it was their solemn duty to be transparent in the management and accounting of expenditure to the people of this country. So this didn't start here with a public financial management bill. We started with a covenant of hope that was settled as far back by the highest decision-making body of the party to which we belong. And while this Parliament does not formally recognize political parties, we do. And that annual conference at Foundation School back in October of 2015 made it absolutely clear that we could not seek to come after a government that had exhibited the highest form of banditry, wickedness, covert activity in the expenditure of the taxpayers' money and be anything other than absolutely transparent with respect to the management of the people's funds. We felt then, sir, that the most important thing, therefore, was to set out the principles upon which our government and our philosophy, as a member who just sat down, referred to so eloquently, that if you are not capable of believing in something, you will stand for anything. And we said in that document, the Covenant of Hope, what we stood for and what we would fight for. And it was a very clear statement as well that Barbadians would not have to guess how we would spend their money. Because not only would we tell them, but we would continue to show them. And we also set up on page 26 a program of priorities for fiscal governance to which we would be committed. this House will soon learn that what we say we do, because when the estimates come to be presented before the end of this fiscal year for the next fiscal year, you will see where the government's priorities lie in accordance with those principles set out on page 26 of the Covenant of Hope. Having had that document approved by that annual conference of 2015 at Foundation School, it was appropriately launched at Solidarity House in May 2016. And from that document then came the manifesto of the Barbados Labour Party, upon which we were elected and from which we spoke to the people of this country. We said then that there should be greater transparency and accountability. And in less than the 9 months, it is now 8 months that we've been there next week, we have already brought to this House 2 major pieces of legislation with respect to the personal conduct of public officials, but other pieces, 2 other amendments in July, related to the standards to which public finances must be held, and we have incorporated some of those that I've just spoken about in this piece of legislation here before this Honourable Chamber, that seeks in almost every respect to heighten the levels of accountability and transparency by a government of Barbados, by ministries and departments, by ministers and public officials, by commercially owned state enterprises and other state enterprises in this country. In other words, all entities or persons acting in the public name in this country. And sir, we are doing it because having gone so far off track, having gone to the point, and in the conduct of the estimates of expenditure and revenue as we prepare for next year, I am reminded now daily that how did a government move from $6 billion in debt to $15 billion in debt with nothing to show for it? With nothing to show for it. With the Minister of Health this morning telling me that he is in urgent need to repair broken infrastructure and equipment that is failing and faltering because not a cent. In fact, over the life of the last 10 years, almost $500 million was withdrawn from the needs of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, to the tune or to the point where what it owed to BRA and to national insurance and to suppliers is in the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. To the point where a government is paying back the Inter-American Development Bank for an electronic single window, which was intended to fuel and facilitate competitiveness in the importing of goods in this country. And we have $5 million paid for it, only to find that the last government did nothing to touch it after December 2017 because they were only interested in the final dark days of doing things that may have helped them, I assume, but would not have added value to the country. And it is only now that we literally are going through and pulling out ministry by ministry by ministry, we are finding things that ought to have been done for the benefit of the country that have been put long away and hidden away, but the country is paying the debt. Or to the electronic national ID card project. $7.5 million spent years ago, 3-4 years ago, and the cards are being stored in a warehouse. 500,000 of them bought 3-4 years ago. Mr. Speaker, sir, no government in this country must ever be allowed to act in a manner in which the last government acted, with impunity, hiding under the cover of night, nothing to show for what they did to take money from innocent taxpayers. And we have come here conscious that this piece of legislation is not about getting even with a previous government. This piece of legislation is about the future. This piece of legislation is about the standards to which we bind ourselves as a government in good faith. Sir, I heard the leader of the opposition with his comments that were intended to create a cloud where he wanted to. And I say to him that his conscience should tell him that whenever all is said and done, he knows by participating in this committee's work that reports to us that the courage which this government exhibits by holding itself to standards that hitherto no previous government since independence has done ought to be at least the subject of commendation rather than to be tainted with the kind of innuendo that I heard today. Let's deal with the one that he said he reserved himself on, and that relates to the whole question of contingencies. What does it say here? You would think, listening today, and what did he say? A Minister of Finance who this time happens to be the Prime Minister. And what standards we want to hold them to. And you would think that the Prime Minister or the Minister of Finance can now do something with a contingency vote without being accountable to anybody. Well, I take it that he does not understand the law, and therefore the Attorney General or even myself can try to help him to understand that the language used in here, what section it is again? Section clause 23(1). Listen to the words. The minister responsible for finance may, first thing, discretionary, include in the appropriations. Oh, Kadir. What is the appropriations? A document hidden under cover of night? Or is the appropriations the said schedule to the Appropriation Act? And is the Appropriation Act not a document that has to pass both houses of Parliament and to be signed by Her Excellency the Governor General? And that contingency, which shall provide for an urgent and unforeseen need for expenditure, and shall not exceed 3% of the recurring expenditure. So for the first time, the government of Barbados is now placing a cap on contingencies. Before, any Minister of Finance could have put any amount of contingency in these estimates without a cap. So that the public purpose of this clause is to place a cap, not to give somebody a power that is to be exercised under cover of night. The second part, the Cabinet may authorize a charge for the purpose of contingencies where it has received justification in writing from the Minister responsible for finance. Do you know that now contingencies can be spent by a line ministry without so much as a whimper to the Minister of Finance or even the Cabinet? So that clause 2 introduces another standard of behavior which is higher than what exists now in our system. I can't even say at law. So that I simply say to the member that I understand, and believe you me, he is still a friend to many people on this side. He is. But I understand that he needs now to ramp up some energy and some fire on the launch of his political party in the next few weeks. I get that. But make sure that when it is done on a substratum of fact that can be proven and make sense. And make sure that when we're talking about accountability, that we talk so appropriately. And let's deal with what I mean. One, name me one other government that has brought legislation here that says that a government will now issue a pre-election fiscal report through the Director of Finance.
Not one.
Name me one government since 1951. Name me one government since the introduction of the Bush experiment, since the introduction of an independent Barbados, that says that the people of this country deserve an independent report as to the fiscal circumstances of the country before voting. Now, you only do that if you intend to deal with things honorably and feel that you have confidence in yourself to deliver. And we have confidence in ourselves to do right by the people of Barbados. I belong to a previous Labour Party government that in 1994, as one of its first acts, came here and reduced the overdraft from 17.5% of government, the Ways and Means account, to 10%. But I have great honor now in leading a Labour Party government that has come to this Parliament since July, within less than 90 days in office, and has reduced that overdraft limit from 10% to 7.5%, a feature that is repeated in this legislation again. And that same Labour Party government that I lead now went further than any other government since independence or since the Bush experiment, and put in here for the first time a clause that controls the extent to which government securities can be issued and the parliamentary oversight that must now be attached to it, such that a central bank may not again print money to buy over $2 billion in government securities and to foist the greatest hoax on a public of Barbados that was fostered on them as was done in the last decade. Do you understand that the government had not relied on any printing of securities such that the central bank held zero in government securities in the year 2008? And late last year, on the eve of the domestic debt restructuring, the central bank held, between overdraft, debentures, and treasury bills, almost $2.2 billion. Don't matter what it did to the NIS. We left the NIS holding $1.8 billion in government securities to come back and find it owning almost $3.5 billion in government securities, almost a doubling, and nothing to show for it. I go further. On transparency and accountability, we are imposing a level of obligations on ourselves in the 8th schedule to this bill for an internal audit committee. Name me how many other pieces of legislation passed since independence have committees reviewing government action with persons not originally nominated by politicians. Do you understand what this bill does in terms of breaking new ground? That this bill has an internal audit committee that has the Director of Finance ex officio and by reason of his office. The Controller General, and I'm going to come back to the Controller General that we have added because we have found the need to be able to have all of government's data and financial accounting pulled together. A representative of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Barbados, otherwise known as ICAB. Mr. Speaker, and then persons nominated and to be appointed by the minister, but nominated by the trade union and by the private sector bodies. And the only reason the minister has a role in there is because the person can't appoint themselves. So that internal audit committee, to be chaired then by the DFE, has wide-ranging powers with respect to government's finances, but the composition of the committee is not a political entity. It's not any political appointees. It's not any pork barrel related functionaries. And it has oversight. How much more transparent and accountable can this government be? It's probably unprecedented in the Eastern Caribbean. I go further. A previous Labour Party government made bold to make ministers accountable. For actions that they took that contradicted the advice of their public servants in certain circumstances. I suspect that was done under subsidiary legislation, but I am prepared to be corrected. But this legislation makes it absolutely clear.
Absolutely.
At section 19, at section 20, I was looking at the old bill initially. I got it. At section 19 and 20, that an accounting officer in a department shall in writing promptly make a representation to a minister in respect of a decision of the minister that relates to the financial administration of the department, where the accounting officer disagrees with the decision and the accounting officer is unable to defend the decision as a prudent financial administrative decision, regards the decision as inconsistent with the obligation to ensure that the financial administration of the department is carried out to avoid waste of monies and carried out with propriety. Mr. Speaker, sir, had this been done in the last administration, the country might not have faced some of the dire fiscal circumstances that it faced. And that is why the Public Accounts Committee report of the last Parliament has to be the subject now of investigation in this country. The country wants to know what we are doing about it. We are insisting that the recommendation for further investigation be adhered to, because what transpired at the National Housing Corporation should never have transpired. And when you have a Minister of Cabinet lying on the decisions of a Cabinet, there has to be accountability for that, in particular when it is intended to have a financial benefit and consequence to companies. And when the Cabinet decision does not reflect what he purported that it reflected. And we are saying that that legitimate recommendation made by a Public Accounts Committee report ought to be investigated as was recommended by them. But without prejudice to that, this legislation does not deal with the past, it deals with the future. And it deals, therefore, with ensuring that we continue to commit ourselves that ministers must behave with a certain level of integrity and must comply with appropriate recommendations from the public officers with respect to the public expenditure of funds in this country. And it is captured ultimately at clause 20, subsection 3, that says notwithstanding 1B and subsection 2, where loss, wastage, or improper use of monies by the government occurs as a result of the decision of the minister is liable for the loss, wastage, or improper use of the monies of the government. Now this adds to other things. This adds to the Director of Finance continuing with the right to surcharge, although I must confess that I know of virtually no circumstances where a Director of Finance has surcharged anyone in the government of Barbados. And we need to hold people accountable now for wastage, small or large. Because as in the words of Tanya Stevens in that great song, What a Day, corruption exists in high and low places. And in some instances it's not corruption, it is just gross negligence. But the impact of gross negligence is as inimical to the state and to the well-being and to the wasted opportunities that could otherwise have seen that money be expended for the purposes of good in this country that we have to hold a line. Perhaps of greater import to me is clause 123 with respect to the conduct of state-owned enterprises. How many of us have been around to hear complaints about statutory corporations not laying the reports, not filing the accounts? Member for St. George North been in here as long as being a member for St. Michael North. How many times? Well, we have now given teeth to the Director of Finance by allowing the Director of Finance to be able to take clear action that can lead to the withholding of funds, that can lead also to the Director of Finance making representations to the appointing authority for the Board of Directors and the Chief Executive Officer to take action to dismiss or otherwise discipline any board director or the CEO themselves. Now, this is not a piece of legislation that is intended, therefore, to be a paper tiger. This is giving people real power for there to be real accountability. And I am happy, sir, to lead a government that seeks to put in context that there is a range of behaviors, some negligent, some criminal, for which people need to be accountable for if we are to bring this country back to the straight and narrow path fiscally. And if we are to exhibit the best precepts of governance and to regain the reputation of a country that has hitherto been known for the pride of place for which the rule of law has had in our governance, and the extent to which the precepts of democracy are undergirded by transparency and accountability and participation and social justice. Sir, this is the kind of government that I want to lead. And this is the kind of government that I believe the members on this side and that side who constitute the government want to be a part of. And Mr. Speaker, there are other offenses in here, some of which, had they existed fully, might have been more appropriate, like the taking up of computers and the destroying of data. But you can't win them all. But we shall make sure that the country does not have to suffer from that again in the future. Sir, the reporting of all kinds of people, whether it is ministers coming in the well of Parliament now, and this combined with the changes that will come to the standing orders, such that the estimates of expenditure and revenue are not the subject of just political speeches. Let us do the political speeches for a Sunday evening or on a Thursday night. But in this House, let us give the 280,000 people in this country the benefit of details on the expenditure that we intend to undertake or the expenditure that we have just completed, such that people know that when the taxpayers' money is being expended, small or large, that we are doing so with a purpose. And let me say, sir, that I am not going to be intimidated week after week by allegations of a government having advisors. Every single government, and I'm glad that there was a piece done on the Sunday Sun about it, pointing back to every system under the Westminster system. Same government that we have. That you cannot believe that every skill that you need can be found in either the public service or the elected political class. But the important thing is that you don't hide and do it. Or the important thing is that they don't engage in corrupt conduct or inappropriate conduct. And I want to lay that on the table. You know, when we were going for the maritime delimitation, the government of Barbados, under the late, great Sir Harold St. John, had been engaging in discussions. The member for St. James South, St. James Central, can tell you because he was in the ministry at the back end. But Sir Harold had been engaged in discussions with the government of Trinidad and Tobago for in excess of 20 years. Prior to 1986, they went through the then Ambassador Frank de Silva and others. Then it came back to Sir Harold again. And in the 21st century, we were still not getting anywhere with these matters. And a decision was taken by the then Labour Party government for us to go to arbitration. And we knew that there would be some cost to it. And we knew that there was a risk of some time. Indeed, the leader of the opposition was in the ministry with me as my parliamentary secretary, if my memory serves me correctly. And we did the decision that however eminent Barbadian legal counsel were, and we had eminent legal counsel, Sir Henry, managing partner of Carrington and Seeley, Dr. Cummins, but that they were not experienced enough in the craft of international maritime disputes, but that they would bring to the table the local perspective. And that we had therefore to marry their skills with international law skills, international maritime skills, and then people versed in arbitration as well. And we put together a legal team of 3 or 4 persons. We were told before we went that other countries would take and have taken 8, 10, 12 years to conclude these matters, and that we would probably see opposition first before these matters would be finished with Trinidad. And there were some even on our side who doubted when I advised the cabinet that we could do it. But we did it. And it cost us $6 million US. $6 million US over 2 years. A lot more money than it would have cost us if we had only used local counsel. But if we had only used local counsel, we might be there for 10, 12 years, in which case the total money would still be there. And the simple example was there prudence in how we negotiated with them their fees? Yes, there was. And did their fees allow us to be able to access a level of expertise that hitherto we would not be able to access? Yes. And it would be no different with other skills that we are now accessing as a government in circumstances where the crisis that faces the country, or that faced the country that we took over, was multiple crises. You understand what I'm saying? That in almost every single ministry there was a crisis of circumstances. And when people ask me, how has it been? I say intense. And the AG can say so too. because perhaps more than any other member of cabinet, he has had to face, like me, the intensity of the difficulties cutting across ministry by 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 ministry. And with all due respect, sir, there are still only 24 hours in a day. When I say to you that if I don't ever want to see another member of those persons who sat for the Democratic Labour Party government for the last 10 years, I would be the happiest person alive. Because day by day I am reminded of the manner in which they sacrifice this country. Sacrifice this country. Not always for personal means. In some instances, out of pure, utter indifference and incompetence. Or as the last member who spoke said, because they didn't care enough about people. What he said, what kind of human species it was that walked without a heart. That was the language he used. And therefore, part of the difficulty of a small state such as ours is that invariably you do not have sufficient capacity in the executive. Just go to a conference and see how many people the Canadians walking with, or the British walking with, or even the Jamaicans or Trinidadians walking with at a conference. Small states, part of the reality of smallness is that we have limited capacity, but we have all of the same obligations of other sovereign states and challenges. And consequently, you may not always find within the bosom of the executive in the public service or the political elected class the range of skills necessary to do what has to be done. Now, sir, because of our concern for the innuendo and all of the other things, trust me on this. Everything is subject to an open book in this government other than national security matters. Everything. And I go further, because yesterday I received a letter from the successor entity to Cahill seeking to claim legal rights against the government of Barbados. Cahill. Contracts that were signed under cover of night even before the cabinet of Barbados got to see them. And I say simply to you, Mr. Speaker, sir, that I said it in December. I wish I could turn the circumstances of this country and change them overnight. We all do. We can't. But what we can give this country overnight is a commitment to a level of transparency and accountability in the conduct and management of the affairs of this country that it has hitherto not had, certainly for the last 10 years. And what we can also do, sir, is that we are going to be accountable for our choices. And there will be areas of activity that the leader of the opposition and his new party may say, we disagree with you spending money on that. And we say, we hear you, but it is our duty to be accountable for the mandate which we have received. And we believe that on claims of public expenditure, here is the hierarchy. And we didn't only tell you that in government, we told you that in the Covenant of Hope, launched in 2016, agreed to in October 2015. Law and order. Public health and affordable access to health care. Empowerment of our people through education and protection of the vulnerable. Protection of public spaces. The productive sectors, recognizing, and this is where others get tired, when they say that we don't have a growth strategy, that the growth strategy for the productive sectors is not limited to tax and spend. And that the growth strategy for the productive sectors involves, as you saw here, by the excellent work done by the Ministry of International Business and the Minister of International Business recently, through legislation, through facilitation, through regulation, through empowerment, through investment. And therefore, the combined activities that we use with the Ministry of Tourism, or the Ministry of International Business, or the Ministry of Industry, or the Ministry of Agriculture, may see growth coming about not only because government has spent money, but because government has exercised its powers as a government either through the legislature or through the executive to be able to facilitate and to fuel certain activity that will add value. Did we tax and spend to bring Ross here? No, we did not. But through the facilitation that we offered and through the framework and the policy that we put in place, we were able to do so. And as for the innuendo on Coverley, let the record be shown that the government of Barbados took a decision that the previous government did not take, that with respect to the lands at Coverley, rather than wait and get, as the last government was doing, less than $20,000 per house when a house was sold, and if it was rented, they never got it. Public Accounts Committee report will reflect that we took the decision to sell the land at a price that would give us a return that was almost 3 times as great or more, and to sell the land for $13.5 million for the houses at Coverley. So that we have no part of it. But the coffers of the Crown will be $13.5 million richer for land that has been in the possession of the same developer for almost 10 years without a cent coming to the Crown for that particular set of land for which we have now received money. Do you understand what I just said to you, Mr. Speaker? That land was in their possession. It could have been in their possession for another 10, 15 years if the houses didn't sell. And the government of Barbados would get nothing. And in fact, because he is renting, we would have gotten nothing if we had just done what the last government did. Because they have not sold the houses to Ross, they are in fact renting the houses to Ross. But we said in our government, this is not good enough. And we therefore approached the developer and said to him that you're going to have to pay the government for the land, which is going to earn you a rent for the houses that you are going to complete. And that because we want to be able to keep the relationship clean and separate and apart, pay us for the land. And in fact, AG, the value given to us by the valuation was how much? The value was less than what we got. If my memory serves me correct, the value was single digit.
We carried them up.
And we then carried them up beyond the valuation that was given. And I would want that these documents be made documents of the House of Assembly because there must be full transparency. Look, I once said, and remember, for St. Michael West, the leader of the opposition, was present at Queen's College at that annual conference. It was the annual conference when I first became leader of the Barbados Labour Party. It was held at Queen's College in 2008, October. It was the one that we were given the Grantley Adams Award to the former leader of the party. And I had cause to say then, and I say it again now. The problem is people keep reading me for balling googlies, and I balling the ball straight. But anybody who has been in cricket long enough, if you playing a man for a googly and you get a straight ball, you can get out. And worse still, if you're playing a woman for a googly and you get a straight ball. We have nothing to prove. We really don't. We are not perfect. But what we are going to do is to do the people's work, and we are going to hold ourselves to some standards that hitherto no government in the history of this country in a modern Barbados has ever held themselves to. And it may mean that one or two of us might get tripped up along the way. Such is life. P.J. Patterson resigned from a cabinet in Jamaica and came back as a prime minister a year later. Why? Because there are times when public officials find themselves at the center of difficulties that require a public action to be taken. Such is the nature of public life. But what we must never do is to do what the last government did, to so hide behind everything in the sole interest, and it goes back down to philosophy, you know. The Democratic Labour Party spoke about party paramountcy back in the early 1990s. Remember, for St. Michael East just now spoke to you about a leader of that party saying that he had no philosophy. Another one said in here, the former Prime Minister said of his predecessor, the same one, that he had no moral minimum. These are all things known to us. They took and embraced the notion of Basil Pandey that politics has its own morality, a statement that I have rejected wholeheartedly throughout my entire political career. If political morality is different from normal morality, then go and live on Mars. But you cannot hold a country accountable, and you cannot have a set of laws that is applicable to one set of people and not another set of people. And Mr. Speaker, it means that sometimes, yes, you do take the sweet with the bitter and the good with the bad. But what you must always be prepared to do, because it is the test of maturity of an adult, and we are an adult nation, you must always be prepared to accept the consequences of the choices you have made, the decisions you have made, and the actions you have made. And we, through this piece of legislation, say we are going to do that. On the other hand, we use this opportunity, even in advance of the reform of the national procurement legislation, to be able to urgently address some matters that need to be addressed because there are sectors and groups that are hurting. And a government that does not understand the need for affirmative action in a country that is scarred by breaches of social justice and inequity and poverty is a government in our part of the world that is not worth its salt. I do not belong to such a party, and I do not lead such a government. I am happy to be associated, and once again, this is not a commitment that we made only in an election. We have been talking about this for years, many years on that side. That we now have legislation that affirms in us the right to provide for the differently able, the opportunity to be the beneficiaries of 1% of government's procurement. And for those who say 1% is minimal, let us remind you that for most of the people who are differently able, we are talking about contracts like caning these same chairs instead of having the upholstery in here. And quite frankly, the cane look better than the upholstery. It does. We're talking about other things that they do, little bags that they make, little things that they can do that the Hotel Palmarine and others can buy. And why is it important? For any parent who has a differently able child, their greatest concern is what happens to that child when they pass away. Now, I don't have children, but I have an aunt who helped raise me, who is deaf-mute, and who has lived with our family from the time I was a baby. And we all know that should something happen to our parents, that our responsibility is to sustain her. But she grew up in a time when she would not have had the opportunities that others have now to be able to secure a living for themselves, because she's about 80 85, 86, somewhere up in there. Don't mind she don't look it, but I say so because she never had to pay a bill. It's true.
Useful living. Pay bills.
And then, so we feel, and especially with the excellent work being done not just by the School for the Blind, that was doing it for decades, we now have added to that the Derek Smith School for Vocational Learning. And anybody who has visited that school will see that they're being taught in all kinds of things, from culinary arts to gardening to carpentry to all kinds of things. And the government must be a purchaser of their services and goods so that those people can have money to pay for board and lodging. Similarly, we all know, and we've said it over and over, that our greatest regret was the fact that over the course of the last few years, as we rubbed shoulders, we found too many young people who had left school and who had not yet found a job for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And in spite of the fact that more young people today are willing to be entrepreneurial, there was nobody also buying their goods and services with things that they want to do. There are people in Delamere Land and Martindale's Road who accosted me on both sides, who want to be able to sell services on the precincts of the hospital. Look how many people go to the hospital every evening, every day. There are some who go during their lunch hour and therefore cannot go and buy lunch elsewhere. There are some who they just want to wash cars. And there are many people who may not have the time to wash their own cars at home and will be happy to give a $10 for it. Why can't we think out of the box, both to facilitate entrepreneurial activity, but also to be able to allow them to have a higher score? Doesn't mean that you hand it out to them, but it means that for 5% of government's goods and services, we identify those areas where we feel that young people could possibly have a competitive advantage. And this is not a commitment like the last government to do 40% procurement, that the only time it found its way into the stratosphere was in the DLP manifesto and in the throne speech of the Governor General at the opening of a parliament. Never ever to be seen again. Because it was an unrealistic prospect too in terms of how they manage it. And we have put in figures because what do I say to us all the time? Let us claim ground where we can and build on what we have claimed. And we say that and every year, between the ages of 18 and 35, we are talking about just about 70,000 young people, 75,000 young people, because you're talking about an age cohort that can go from anywhere between 3,800 to 5,000, depending on the year in which you take it. So we have 75,000 people. And we are saying that 5% of government's goods and services, which roughly is about $20 million, ought to be made available in some form or fashion. And the last one is geographical origin. Why? A fellow should not have to come, with all due respect, from the city to go to Crab Hill to fix the pavilion in Crab Hill, if it is a $50,000, $60,000 job. And anything under $250,000, a fellow should not have to go from Bush Hall to Gemswick to fix, if we took responsibility for the early childhood center, or to fix Four Roads School in St. Philip. And why? Because at the end of the day, in each parish, there are artisans. And in each parish, there are craftsmen. And more often than not, if you give people work in their own community, there is a greater sense of pride taken in the delivery of the work But secondly, and the maintenance of the work. But secondly, the people in the community, and I had a perfect case of it in Chapman's.
Ownership of it.
A lady called Hyacinth of blessed memory. Remember, for St. Thomas knows her well. Spent her whole life working on Lear's plantation. Became the beneficiary of repairs by rural. The man did such bad work on Hyacinth House. That piece of the board fall through and all in the flooring board. He came from deep in the country. I'm not looking at the member for St. Lucie. And no matter what was done, they could not get the gentleman to come back and fix the lady's house. I'm sure she died of heartache. Because when you reach a certain age, old people take on things, senior citizens take on things. And every time I spoke to her, or others would speak to her, she would preface every conversation about the state of the house and the state of the repairs. Now, if a person from Jackman's did that, every time they go by the shop by Blunt, old Blunt shop that's now run by a fellow from St. Philip Sports Bar in Skeets Road, or I have to go to the top now to sell the food rights opposite Lear's pasture. Somebody would tell them, what kind of man you is at all? How you could do that to her house? When you were a little boy running about here bareback, she used to be giving you rock cakes. Or she used to be helping you from stopping to get into trouble when your parents couldn't get home on an evening. Whatever the relationship, the social fabric is different once you start dealing in a community with people who people know. And therefore the accountability comes not only by reason of the permanent secretary or the accounting officer holding the person, but the community as a whole starts to hold them accountable for their actions. Similarly, if it is a group of persons who paint in Eagle Hall Primary School, they're going to say, you can't come out here and mess up that school. I worked too hard on that school last summer. I worked too hard on that school 2 years ago. People then have a different relationship to defend the work that they have done, and there becomes a different sense of pride in the community. Now, when you add this to what we are hoping to do through the member of Christchurch West Central with respect to community divestment of community centers, so that communities can manage their own facilities, we are going to begin, and the Attorney General and I talked about it in his estimates yesterday, that we have to empower people at the level of the community again to be able to be in charge, Mr. Speaker, of what goes on in their parish or their community. That's what a magistrate for a district was about, that they could keep order, and they bind you to order on your own recognizance in a community. And similarly, the community groups, and that's why I'm so angry. How can a government move from spending $5 million a year in training for young people and then take that same money and spend it in youth camps, summer camps, and Christmas camps, and Easter camps? And by the very admission of the public officials up to yesterday, 3/4 of the $5 million goes in catering. And then you want to know, in the language of Peter Ram, how do you get so? Then you want to know why we are facing problems in this country between certain age groups. When last have you seen a community group formed, or a sports group, or a cultural group? I don't mean a football team playing football on a field. I mean a real sporting group or cultural group or community group. And my government has set as its mission the formation and the expansion of these groups for 8 to 15-year-olds. And if we have to think outside of the box, as we are doing with the amendments to the procurement legislation, we will do so, because we are cognizant that there are some things that, because they are new, may get some people to wonder and want to cast innuendo. Well, the best way around that is to share the facts and to show the precepts that are being adhered to. And I give not just the honourable members of this chamber, Mr. Speaker, through you, that commitment, but I give the country that commitment, because we are going to have to do things differently in the third decade of the 21st century. But the precepts and principles upon which we shall do them remain fast and firm for us in terms of integrity, transparency, accountability, and honesty, in a way that all of us would want them to be. And I say to you, sir, that all major contracts as well for public-private partnerships signed by our government have also to be laid in this chamber, such that a Cahill episode does not happen in future by anyone in this country. Mr. Speaker, you will now better appreciate why, in spite of how long this day has been, and why I had to break the conduct of estimates to come here, why I had to come to speak, because I see the passage of this public financial management bill as a major, major, major development in the governance of Barbados. And there are other clauses in here that we have not adverted to because of the lateness of the hour. But suffice it to say that we have agreed that it will come in by a date to be proclaimed. We expect that date to be September, largely because there are administrative systems that have to be put in place to ensure that ministries can comply with the law. In spite of that, however, we are going to go ahead with the changes in the standing orders, subject to the Standing Orders Committee agreeing to them, of course, that will allow us to have a new form of process for estimates of expenditure and revenue in the House of Assembly, such that a committee of the House will sit as a whole, but will have the opportunity to question members of the ministry's staff and the minister in the well of the House on the details of the expenditure and revenue that are being proposed for this. We could not account for the reporting of the non-financial aspects of the ministry to be in compliance with this legislation for next month, but we can for 2020. And therefore, that is why the proclamation of the bill will come within 6 months' time, such that the relevant officials in each ministry and in each state-owned enterprise can do their checklists of the things that they must now comply with in order to have this bill be effective, not just in its passage, but in the manner in which it is enforced and respected by individual ministries and state-owned enterprises. Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, I want to thank all who played a role. The Minister in the Ministry of Finance, the member for Christchurch East Central, was pivotal, along with the Permanent Secretary, the Director of Finance, and the other officials in the Ministry of Finance, in bringing us to the stage of being able to have something go before the Chief Parliamentary Counsel's office. I want to thank Ms. Bell, I think it was, and the Chief Parliamentary Counsel for working beyond the call of duty in December to put us in this position to be here. And of course, sir, I'd like to thank the Honourable Attorney General, who took personal care and attention in ensuring not only that the bill came here, but that he, with distinction and with a level of rapidity, saw over the functioning of the Select Committee And I thank all members of the Select Committee, including the Leader of the Opposition, for agreeing to work in quick time such that this government is able to bring to you the second reading of this bill, such that we can hopefully complete it tonight in all of its stages, and that it can go to the other place before it goes to Her Excellency to receive the assent. I am proud to be in this Parliament to lead a government at this stage that has the confidence in itself that it can rise to the standards of transparency and accountability that are truly world-class that we are reflecting here in this bill. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the House suspends its proceedings for 5 minutes. Second it, right?
Session at this honorable chamber be suspended for 5 minutes. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We take the ayes of it. This honorable chamber is suspended for 5 minutes.